We've talked about White Lions, we've talked about the Sea Guard, did that on stream yesterday. So, what about the Grand Army? Well, the Grand Army is where I've ended up for playing. It has been announced as of this morning that I will be the High Elf player for Team England. So, I've got a lot of list building and practice to get ahead of me. So, if you're a High Elf player, look forward to that. There'll be plenty of that coming over the next 6 months, although I will be playing other things, making sure there's variety on the channel. However, I think Grand Army is the best all-comers tournament list. Maybe I look at something other for teams, but that's where I want to start off. So let me walk you through how my list was written, the sort of approach that I went with, how I ended up where I went to. In my eyes, for High Elf Grand Army, you've got three different ways of list building. The first one is the Sisters of Avalorn. You take a big unit of Sisters of Avalorn in your core slot, and that does mean that you can't take a Prince on a Dragon. You have to have your highest leadership character be a Handmaiden, because they have to be the General. You can still take a Noble as a BSB. With their leadership 9, the BSB stops them from being a General, but you're not able to take the top level Dragon. So that is a sacrifice you make. One of the options there, not the one I've gone with here. The second option is to go for a big toughness 4 Death Star. I really like that build. It's not necessarily my play style, but I will be playing around with it, making sure that it's not the best option. But that's not what we've gone with here. What I want to do is I want to have a independent core that isn't going to die immediately, has a reasonable amount of punch, gives up less points than it takes. That's the thinking. That's what I'm going with. And also the fact that you've got unit champions in there as well is really nice when you've got dragons that we'll talk about in a second. So we've gone for step number 3. And step number 3 is building a list where your core is independent, but that means you get to take a character that's very effective or a couple of characters that are very effective, as you'll see. So when we're writing this sort of list, I think the place to start is the core. And I want to give a shout out to Liam Jordan. Liam, who wrote the Goonhammer article, I'll link it down below if you haven't already seen it, goes into depth about the things that he thinks are good in the new High Elf Arcane Journal. He's very positive about it, as am I. I think it's great. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. Obviously, a lot of the actual Armies of Infamy are better in an infantry-dominated meta, but outside of that, I think there's a lot of strength in there. So, on his recommendation, I've been testing out units of 6 Silverhelms. He's played around with them a fair bit. He says that they're good. I trust him. I've played with them. I like them. So you take 6 Silverhelms and you take full command as well. Normally, I wouldn't want to take a standard bearer, because when a standard bearer dies in combat, or if it's run down, it gives up an additional 50 victory points, which is antithetical to what I'm trying to do with the list. However, in Liam's opinion and in Liam's testing, he's found that you need the combat res from the standard bearer. Silverhelms have first charge, as you can see here, which means that when you go into combat, what's going to happen is you're going to have static combat res of 2, 1 for close order, 1 for having a standard. Your opponent's probably going to have the same, because you're going to remove their unit, their rank bonus. So really, it just comes down to wounds, and it can get a little bit dicey because Silverhelms punch okay. They're not super punchy, but they are reasonable enough, with the addition of the Ring of Fury, which lets you cast Hammerhand, bounce spell at a level 2, 2d3 strength 4 AP2 hits, which is just enough to push them over into being like reasonably punchy as long as you pick your fights. So I'm going to play around with the standard bearer. I might take them out in the future, but I think they're really solid and they're worth testing, even if it's different to how I'd normally play them. And they look good. It's nice to have models on the table that look representative of Warhammer, and that unit, 6 Silverhelms, does look representative of Warhammer, so big fan of that. I've also gone with a unit of 6 Illyrian Reavers. There's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that if you go 3 units of Silverhelms, 3 times 187 does not equal 500 points. It comes out quite a bit more than 500 points. You're looking at, what, 570 points, 571, something like that, which means that you're putting more points into core than you want to, and I don't love dropping the units down to 5, so I probably want to go 2 units of Silverhelms and then also something else. And the thing that I've gone for here is Illyrian Reavers. I will say, I don't think these are pointed correctly in Old World Builder. They come out differently in New Recruit. I'll have to double check. So here I haven't got the Musician. I haven't been able to fit that in, because that would put me over, I believe. But I'll double check, because I think they should cost a point more per model. Anyway, I've gone for 6 Illyrian Reavers. And why have I gone for 6 Illyrian Reavers? Well, they're going to be the bunker for my wizard. Why am I going for a bunker for my wizard? You're going to want to take a level 4. I think Battle Magic is disgustingly good. We'll talk about that in a second. but I want somewhere to put them. And I could go with an infantry unit, but I find with Battle Magic, it's very valuable to have it in a 360-degree line of sight, very fast skirmish unit, and Illyrian Reavers fill that role. They don't have a lot of the rules that I'd want them to have. They don't have skirmishes inherently. You have to pay for it. They have to pay 2 points if they want short bows and also the cavalry spears. So I've just gone for the cavalry spears here. But they are relatively cheap. And what you do get is I've taken a unit champion, the Harbinger, we've given them the Lawmaster's Cloak. The reason for this is the sort of thing that normally kills light cavalry, especially light cavalry with only a 6-up armor save, is something like a Ruby Ring of Ruin, a Fireball, any of those spells. Having a 4-up ward save against it means that my wizard's going to be alive for longer. I've got a lot more flexibility with how I position it. Obviously, it still dies to proper shooting, but just position better. It's a lot easier to avoid ballistic skill shooting than it is to avoid magic missiles. A wizard is quite often going to be quite fast. You're probably going to be able to, they're going to be able to catch you. So something to avoid there. And I'd much rather have the ward save than -1 to be hit or something along those lines. Moving into characters, given that we've got a core and that's shaped how the list is going to look, we know that we want to have an Archmage on a horse. That's going to be our magical defense, our magical offense. And it is quite a big part of the list, in my opinion. You're going to go for Arcane Urgency as the #1 important spell, Fireball, Pillar of Fire. These are the really good spells. If you get Oaken Shield, great. Gives you a little bit more tankiness on your unit against sort of just general shooting. If you get Curse of Arrow Attraction, great. Makes a lot of the shooting that you've got in the list better, so really valuable. Curse of Cowardly Flight also exists. This is the sort of army where I might actually take Vowel's Unmaking, because I don't really care about any of the other signature spells. So being able to just conditionally ruin the defenses of your enemy when you're going in with your dragon into them is quite nice. Vowel's Unmaking you can cast into combat as well. So this is something that I did pick in my game that we'll talk about later on. Super simple build. We've gone level 4, Elven Steed, Silvery Wand, Pure of Heart, Battle Magic. Battle Magic is really good. I'm going to give you an example. One of the reasons I wanted to show the game later on is how I like to position a dragon. When you can move it 40 inches in one turn, you've got a huge amount of flexibility where you can put it, and it's really hard for your opponent to deploy to deal with it. Also, Silvery Wand gives you +1 spell known. 1 in 6 games, you're not going to know Arcane Urgency, and that does suck. However, we're really squeezed on points for characters, so I just don't think there's any way to fit a Lore Familiar in, which is unfortunate because I'd really like to have it. Pure of Heart, we've gone for that as the honor just because it's free. It's the only free honor that you can take while still being mounted, not on a, some sort of specific mount. It gives you immunity to panic, which is really nice for a fast cav unit because they do often take some casualties, and it also gives you an aura of leadership. Doesn't matter on the Archmage, but it does matter on the Noble, which we're coming to in just a second. Second character to talk about is the Noble, and one of the reasons I didn't want to go for the big Death Star, despite it being not super my playstyle, if you go for the Death Star, you have to put a lot of your character points into supporting it. I'd have had to put, the BSB with the Banner of Resilience and probably the caster into the unit of Silver Helms if I went for that sort of plan. So instead of doing that, what I've gone with is something a little bit more independent. Gives me a lot of flexibility, can partner up with a dragon, can run on its own, and that is a Noble BSB on a Griffin. So, what have I gone for? Starting out, I'm on a Griffin, I'm reasonably tanky, and I've gone for BSB, War Banner, and I'm Close Order as well. That gives me 3 static combat res, which is really nice. You can put that into support into combats. You don't have to worry about doing quite as much damage to still win combats. You're sub 300 points, which I think is pretty nuts for how good this unit is. And defensively, it's also pretty tanky. I've got it up to a 2-up armor save, or 3-up if I decide to use the Great Weapon in combat, between the Charm Shield, Dragon Helm, and Full Plate as well. I've got a 6-up ward save against flaming attacks, which is the sort of thing that might deal with it. So someone might send a Pillar of Fire at it, or Fireball, or Blue Fire Siege. So having a conditional ward save from the Dragon Helm there is nice. I've also got a single 5-up ward save. Charm Shield is only 5 points. If you're going to take a shield and you don't have a ward save, take a Charm Shield. I probably could look at upgrading that to Enchanted Shield, but I think I like the Charmed Shield more. It gives you a little bit more protection if you ever come up against something like a Killing Blow or an Ogre Blade. You've only got a 1 in 3 chance of stopping it, but I'd actually like to have that 1 in 3 chance instead of just falling over and dying immediately. Other than that, Cedar Rebirth, stupid cheap, shouldn't be allowed to be taking so many, but I can do, so I'm going to do it. And then I've got Pure of Heart. Pure of Heart is really nice because what it does is, again, it means you never panic. but it gives you the ability to give your leadership in an aura. So Noble is leadership 9. It would normally be a 12-inch leadership banner because it's the BSB, gives you a 12-inch command range, but it's also a large target. So effectively, I've got a second general in terms of leadership. This list is never going to run away. There's a lot of Ignores Panic in there. There's a lot of leadership 9 or leadership 10. And because he's the battle standard bearer, you also get to reroll Panic, rally tests, and break tests as well. So just having this unit in adds a lot of consistency to the list, which is something I really value. Not only is it a strong unit in the early turns where it's near the rest of my, slightly squishier units that might take panic checks, I'm likely to not have to run away, which I think is... Finally, I've gone for the Prince on Star Dragon. And while you'd expect to see one of these in a Grand Army list, I have had to go a little bit non-standard for items because I think there are threats that this list needs to deal with. Now, for teams, maybe this ends up getting changed up because maybe we just say that I never get thrown into having to deal with Bretonnians. But I think just having the standard, armor save, ward save, regen against a meta where you're expecting to see a lot of Bretonnian players and Bretonnians win the majority of events, I don't really think that's acceptable in terms of trying to write a list that's going to win as many games as possible. So, with that in mind, what have I gone for? Well, I've gone for a kind of squishy dragon. And I say squishy, I still have a triple save. I'm starting off with a great weapon. I've waxed lyrical about great weapons before on elves. Weapon skill 8, technically. We're striking at initiative 6, plus any charge bonuses there, so we're going to be hitting pretty fast. I find that my dragons tend to get bogged down in combats over a couple of turns. Often I kill the thing that I want to kill on my opponent's turn instead of on my turn, and if they give ground instead of falling back in good order, and if I went with a lance, I'm going to be a lot less effective on that second round of combat. And I find that the risk of taking a little bit more damage from not going for a lance and shield is worth the putting out consistently more damage with my high weapon skill, high value attacks with a great weapon. So that's for me where I fall down on the great weapon versus lance debate. Your mileage may vary. If you want to go a little bit tanky, you can do. I personally think high elf dragons are tanky enough anyway, so I don't really bother with that. Speaking of, how have I equipped it? Well, you can see here that I've got full plate armor that says free because of Blood of Calidor. So let's scroll down to the honor. There's no point taking Pure of Heart here because I've already got an Inspiring Presence range. I do have the Blood of Calidor. What does this give me? Well, for 15 points, I get +1 to my weapon skill, which is quite nice. This wasn't deliberate tech against my Chaos Dwarf opponent, but it did end up being nice. You get free full plate armor. So you can think about it as instead of paying 15 points for this, you're paying 9 points because it's 6 points for the full plate anyway. And you also get the Dragon Armor and Impetuous rules. Now, Impetuous, we know Impetuous is bad. On a unit like a dragon, you can usually charge most things, as long as I'm not in a situation where the only thing I can charge is my opponent's dragon, which people will be able to set up against me. So maybe this is, a little bit risky, and maybe I'll find that I get punished for it. I just need to get the reps in, make sure, test it, see if it's worth going for. But it also gives me Dragon Armor. Dragon Armor gives me a 6-up ward save, which means that I don't have to take a Talisman of Protection, which means I'm saving points. A lot of the decision-making that I've done here is to fit 3 good characters into 1,000 points. This Prince is only 484 points. You could do this for a very similar sort of points level if you just went with the Seed of Rebirth and the Talisman of Protection, but the downside to that is that you'd be losing out on the ability to just sort of blank a killing blow attack, which I think is really powerful. So what I did end up going with is the free full plate, as you'd expect. I've paid for a Charmed Shield, so I've got the 6-up ward save all of the time. I've got a once per game 5-up ward save, usually going to be against shooting because, I'm not going to be using the Charmed Shield in combat. Opal Amulet for once per game 2-up ward save, and this is the anti-Bretonnian bit of the list that I think really just makes it tick. They can come into me, they can killing blow. On average dice, they're unlikely to kill me. There are failure points. They could roll 2 or 3 6s. I could fail the 2-up ward save, but it's a lot. It makes my opponent a lot more nervous about coming in, and that makes me very comfortable playing into the matchup. Obviously, they're probably just trying to avoid me, but I think with this list, I can probably look at winning on points if the Bretonnian player doesn't want to engage. And then I round it out with Seed of Rebirth. Too good, too cheap, too many. But I'm going to take it because, it'd be rude not to. So that is the character points there, and I'm pretty happy with them. Obviously, the Prince is not as tooled up as you might like it to be. It will lose combat to a Chaos Lord with Ogre Blade. My argument to you is, why am I ever ending up in combat with a Chaos Lord with an Ogre Blade? Why don't I just outposition my opponent? That's the thinking. I've got an Arcane Magic caster. I can, I've got a Battle Magic caster. I can Arcane Urgency. I am a dragon. It's very hard to charge me if I don't want to be charged. So as long as I don't make mistakes, I think this Prince should put me in a good position. So looking forward to playing around with that. I think it's probably a good loadout. My game was against Tom Carley. Tom, also Team England, is playing Chaos Dwarves, and he settled on the double flying threat with the double Iron Demons, probably where he wants to play around with the list. So we were having a look at that. He is playing Elementalism on the Sorcerer Prophet, which is a change from what you normally see. You normally see Demonology, making it so that Sorcerer Prophet does charge in and do a lot of damage. But he is playing a lot of Hobgoblins with short bows, so he wanted to test whether, between the Hobgoblins and the Steam Cannonades from the Iron Demons, there's enough shooting in there to make a Plague of Rust really worthwhile going for. Obviously, we don't see any Lore Familiar in there. This is because Storm of Ash is such a good spell. It's a self-range hex. Everything within 9 inches of you is -1 to hit, which is obviously an incredible spell. You don't want to give up on that. It's something that's a little harder to cast, which does come up in this game, and I think we are going to look at tweaking the loadout of the caster, but it is what we've gone for. We randomly determined that we were going to play Flank Attack, and we determined just random rolled on the WTC map pack. I don't believe that they have a full actual map and terrain and rule set yet, but there are some maps in Warhol, so we just randomly generated one of those, ended up on WTC map 2, which is a little bit odd. We've got some terrain that I'll talk through as we get to it in the game. Tom's list, though. You'll probably recognize this if you know Chaos Dwarves at all. We've got double Iron Demon. Very nice. We've got double Flying Threat. There's a Black Orc War Boss with a 2-up save against shooting and a 3-up save in combat, with the full plate and then the Trollhide Trousers for +1 to the save. There's an Enchanted Shield there for a 6-up ward save against non-magical attacks. Basically just makes it more tanky against shooting. And then Effigy of Mork, which gives you -1 to be attacked in combat, which obviously stacks really nicely with the Storm of Ash. And normally means that most things hit you on 6. However, in my case, my weapon skill 8 Prince is going to be hitting on 5s, which is quite nice. And again, as I said, not something I teched for, but a nice upside, and maybe makes this version of the list better into Chaos Dwarves. The Sorcerer Prophet is pretty much as you'd expect, so it has got the Mantle of Stone taking it up to T7, Talisman of Protection for a 5-up ward, and then Armored of Silver Steel, riding a Bale Taurus with a 3-up armor save overall. A single unit of 5 Black Orcs because you have to take them with the War Boss. 2 units of Hobgoblin Cutthroats, just gone for full output. Short bows, very tanky, very cheap for what they are. A unit of 10 Infernal Guard with hand weapon and shield. They have got the banner that turns off levies for any units within 9 inches. So that's kind of how this list plays around, making sure that the Hobgoblins never run away. And the aforementioned 2 Iron Demons as well. So it's a really solid list. It's a really defensive list. It's the sort of thing that it can be quite hard to squeeze points out of. So I think it's a good test because it's the sort of thing where when you haven't played very many games, it's nice to go into an army that isn't necessarily playing aggressively towards you, more has tools to make sure that if you make the wrong decisions, you're punished for it. So it gives you a little bit more wiggle room to get to in the start of the game. This was a little bit of a shorter game. We got to the end of turn 4 and decided to call it. We didn't think there was a lot of point of practicing from that point on. And also, we didn't end turn 2 properly. So turn 2 is between the, both players had turn 2 that'll show on the same screenshot. With that in mind, I'm not going to talk through this sort of on a super blow-by-blow basis, but I am going to go through it, talk about my decision-making, why I went with things, and sort of what approach I took throughout the game. So just to talk through this map, it is one of the WTC ones. In the center, you can see here, this is a ruined building, and also this swamp. These are both dangerous terrain. They don't block line of sight, but they do make it difficult to walk through. We've got a couple of pieces of impassable terrain in the hill and the rock on each flank. We've got the woods here in my deployment zone. There's a hill under the Hobgoblin Cutthroats, and then there's a field here, and the field is difficult terrain, but not dangerous. So nice and easy. The map we don't, the actual mission we generated, I should say, was Flank Attack. So I overcommitted into my flank, and honestly, looking at it now, I think I went up to about 510 points. But it was a mistake to put 3 units into the flank here. I should have done I should have put one less unit in reserve. I should put just one Skycutter and a Noble. And the reason for that is obviously Tom has to commit one unit. With the amount of drops that Tom has, if I'd put one less in, what I could have done is put down everything after him. So it ended up being that I put down my characters and then Tom put down his characters, and that meant that I lost a little bit of flexibility. So I would have been better off putting only one Skycutter and a Noble on the flank. But that's why we do these practice games, isn't it? So we can make sure that we're not making any major mistakes. Tom put a single unit of Black Orcs in the flank there of the Hobgoblin Cutthroats just to try and defend them, and everything else in the centre. A couple of unit Hobgoblins on each flank, characters and Iron Demons in the centre. And the important thing is this unit here of the Chaos Dwarves with shields and the banner that turns off levies. That's important because that's the thing stopping the Hobgoblins from running away. And Tom protects it really well, actually, over the course of the game. So I'll try and point that out as it comes up, because he makes it very difficult for me to get into them, which is one of the things that I wanted to deal with early on. As for myself, I go with the Sisters of Avalon in the centre here, and then a Silver Helms and Skycutters on the left flank, Silver Helms and Delirium Reavers on the right, and the Dragon on the right as well. What I was trying to do is I wanted to full commit to the right hand side and just sweep round and crush a flank. And then I also, to do that, you kind of have to sell that you're not fully committing to one side. So I wanted to put a couple of fast units on the left hand flank that could potentially do something, or move over to the right if needs be. If my opponent full committed over to the left, I could just full commit and do swap deployment zones partially, depending on how the battle worked out. So coming into round one, I did roll first, and I got turn one, and as you can see here, just fully sent forwards. Starting off, I tried to cast Oaken Shield, rolled a double one. I think I miscast 3 times over the course of this game. This was not a good game for Magic on both sides. It ended up being a little bit rough for both of us. But I got off kind of lucky. I rolled a 6 on the miscast. I had 3 partials into the Illyrian Reavers, didn't wound any of them. I didn't wound with the 1 auto hit into this squad, and then I killed a single Silver Helm. So I got off pretty lightly. Honestly, looking at it, I mispositioned my caster. I hit more things than I should have done. This is something that I'm better at doing in person. So I just need to be more cognizant of where I'm putting my caster so that if they miscast before I move anything, they don't take too much damage. Otherwise, it was a pretty easy turn. I had nothing to do in the command phase, no charges, so the dragon moved forwards 20 inches, sat just in front of where the Silver Helms ended up, got my Arcane Urgency off. Obviously, I do have a reroll in the Archmage. Having the ability to reroll a spell every turn is really strong. Coming from a Dark Elf player, it feels great. Instead of having that once per game, you have it every turn, so huge fan of that. I got it off. Tom failed to dispel it on a double 6, and I got my second move, which meant that I was positioned nicely in the flank. And if you have a dragon and you have battle magic, this is absolutely a strong thing that you should be doing. Why? Well, look at the positioning. So you can see from the angle, it's very difficult for anyone to get out of my charge arc if you move backwards. I fully covered it, so realistically nothing there could get into me. Maybe there's some way for, the Sorcerer Prophet to fly past me over here, but I'm not really worried about that. I've got a couple of juicy targets in front of me that can't go anywhere. I'm also angled in the direction that Tom wants to move, which is forwards. So even if he full marches forwards with both of these units, he isn't able to get out there, which is a real problem for him. So I've set up myself with a couple of easy targets, made it difficult for him to respond as well. So this is the sort of position you want to put a dragon in. If you can sweep a flank with a dragon, you're in a very strong spot. If you're flank charging, when you kill something, you're probably going to overrun, and then you can theoretically either fight it again in your turn if you've set up multi-charges, or at worst case, fight it in your opponent's turn and then be able to charge something in your turn. So it makes you get a lot more value out of your dragon than you would if you were just charging in the front and then having to turn and charge again. Otherwise, everything else kind of just moves forwards. The Noble full sends forwards. It is in range of the Sorcerer Prophet, but I figured with my combat res and the fact that Tom hadn't gone for Demonology, he probably didn't want to go for that fight, so I felt comfortable. Everything else was just out of charge range, but I wanted to push up to support. The Lothan Skycutters all try to move forwards to get their bows into range, and the Sisters of Avalon down in the middle here move forwards as well for the same reason. Magic was underwhelming. I killed 2 hobgoblins with a Ruby Ring of Ruin. The Sisters of Avalon did a single wound into the Wyvern with their bows, which was quite nice. And then I think I did maybe 2 wounds with the Fireball from the Battle Magic caster, the Archmage, inside the unit of Illyrian. What I did was I moved forwards and didn't. I valued casting my spells more highly than stopping my opponent from casting their spells. And I think this is wrong. I didn't get punished for it, but just a learning from this that I took is in a case where your opponent's entire battle plan hinges around a spell like Storm of Ash, I probably should have just moved forwards a little bit further. And, I'm going to lose the ability to cast my spell, or like maybe my Pillar of Fire gets dispelled, or whatever. I didn't even get to cast Pillar of Fire because I miscast again, which meant that my casting was finished when I cast my Fireball. But if I'd moved a little bit further forwards, Tom would have been really in some hot water because he wouldn't have been able to try, or I'd have had a much better chance of shutting down his Storm of Ash, which is what I'm trying to say. So really, I should have moved a little bit further forwards. That would have put me in a better position. Aldaloth and Skycutter's fire, 2 of them hit, which is not bad when they're hitting on 5s. None of them do any wounds, so they just stand there and look pretty. But other than that, it's a pretty good turn 1. I'm pretty happy about it. I do some chip damage, but mostly my positioning is very strong. Coming into Tom's turn 2, and because of my positioning, Tom has to turn his entire army to face me. The Hobgoblins kind of shuffle forwards and take some pot shots at the Skycutter, doing nothing. The Iron Demons move forwards, and this unit of Silver Helms that did exist here no longer exists here because they are Plague of Rusted. And this is, again, if I was in range to dispel, maybe that unit of Silver Helms doesn't die. Maybe I've got 2 or 3 of them left. I can get a flank charge. They have first charge, so I would have turned off the rank bonus here. It could have made a big difference. So, yeah, definitely a mistake, something that I need to make sure I'm not doing in the future. Otherwise, the Storm of Ash doesn't go off, fortunately for me, but Plague of Rust does. This unit, Silverhelm, gets shot to pieces by the 2 Iron Demons, and other than that, all that happens is repositioning, and the Sorcerer Prophet does cast Wind Blast, doing a wound to me and pushing me back. It looks like the unit here has died. That hasn't happened. That's just an error with the Warhol output. The reason for that is there were 2 units of Black Orcs stood on top of each other. One of them was removed, so there is still the unit of 5 Black Orcs here, and they have turned to face the dragon just to try and cause some issues. I wonder if it would have been better for Tom to just like try and set them at some sort of weird angle, because as it stood, I just end up charging into them and then overrunning into the unit behind them anyway. But I'm not 100% sure what he could have done. Given that it was in a unit of marching column, I think it was very difficult to position them in a way that I can't get past, but it still causes me issues. Because if he tries to go out at a diagonal, so say like more this sort of way, which he couldn't have done anyway, because I'm in the position I am because of Wind Blast. But let's say he finds some sort of weird angle that he could have gone towards. At that point, I just charge into the corner of the unit up here, and I don't think I particularly care about where I'm left. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe this was just a difficult position that Tom was in, so I don't think there was much else that he could do. But yeah, so not a bad turn for Tom, given the situation he's in. Unit Silverhelms die, everyone else just sort of consolidates their position, and they do a wound to my dragon. Into turn 2, and this is the turn that has everything going on, and there's a lot that happens. So let me just quickly from the top, because this shows both my and Tom's turn. On the left-hand flank, I decide that I want to charge both units into the unit of Hobgoblins. I do. They stand and shoot, do no wounds. Great stuff. The unit of Sisters end up moving backwards just to make themselves a little safer from the Iron Demons that are trundling forwards, because they are very squishy and they don't want to get Iron Demoned, despite having penalties to hit. Both Skycutters here decided they were going to try and charge into the unit of Hobgoblins that was on the hill, but both of them failed the charge. And the thing that works very well for me up in the top right corner is I charge the unit of Black Orcs that was stood in front of the big unit with the dragon, and then I charge the noble into the unit of Hobgoblins. Why is this good? Well, because I've got 2 things going into it. First of all, I can't be challenged out. The unit champion's going to challenge me, my noble's going to accept. That's not a problem. It also means that when I kill the Black Orcs, I can just then make the charge into the, overrun 4 inches, make it into the Hobgoblins. I then get another unit to beat on with a dragon. All of that's good. And that's what happens. I end up killing a lot of them. They don't end up running away because there's a high leadership general. And they do fall back in good order. But because the noble soaks the challenge, the dragon comes in. High Elves have a weapon skill 7 dragon. They also have d6 plus 1 stomps. They're the best dragon in the game for killing chaff. Kill chaff they do. Absolutely melts through the unit. A lot of them die, and they end up in a not a great position. but they're doing their job. They're soaking. They're 150 points or something like that, and I haven't even managed to kill them. So, because of overrunning into this unit, I don't get to move the dragon again, which is a miscalculation on my part. I'm just getting caught up in the idea of going and doing violence, so it does leave me out in the open a little bit. I was trying to engineer a situation where if it all went well, I could overrun into the front of the Sorcerer Prophet. Obviously, that doesn't happen, but I'm not too concerned because of where everything ended up. I wasn't able to, Tom wasn't able to double charge into me. Even if he did double charge into me, he'd be in my rear arc, my front arc, so it wouldn't be adding too much combat res. So it wasn't really too much of an issue because obviously I'm going to challenge. Only one of the characters is going to hit me, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable here. After Tom's round of combat, so that's my turn. Into Tom's turn, the Wyvern charges into my dragon. My noble is locked in combat here with the unit. The Sorcerer Prophet flies around the back of the dragon just to try and back it up on Tom's turn 3, if the Wyvern is still alive at that point. Which, spoiler, it is. This thing is incredibly tanky and a right pain in the backside to deal with. I end up killing the unit of Hobgoblins here, and then angling so that I can charge into more units. I look like I'm at a weird angle, but that's just so that I can draw line of sight from the tip here of the Skycutter into the unit of Chaos Dwarves here. What goes well for Tom? Not a huge amount this turn, I would say. The 2 Iron Demons trundle forwards to get some shots in. They kill a single Illyrian Reaver and do a single wound to the Skycutter, which is not all that much realistically. But yeah, combat goes on. The Wyvern versus the Dragon. We both absolutely whiff, which is very funny. Tom just doesn't roll very well. I end up passing a save on a 6-up ward. I think one of the only ones that he gets through after making some terrible, terrible rolls. I whiff. My whiffs make more sense because I'm hitting him on 5s with the great weapon and 6s with the dragon. I think we both do a wound, both have it saved on regen, or like maybe I do one more wound. The net result is we end up in a tied combat and we're just sat there going, cool, guess we're going to keep doing that. At the end of that, because of sequencing, I know that my noble is able to get the flank charge in next turn if I want to, so I've got it positioned. The Hobgoblins have fallen back in good order. This unit's never running away while the unit of Dwarves is alive. But the noble is here to bring a massive +5 combat res into this. And this is where I think something like the noble on Griffin really shines, because I'm going to have the high ground from the hill, the flank charge, close order, war banner, BSB. I'm bringing so much combat res that theoretically I should just auto win the combat, no matter what happens with the rolls. And ideally, because Tom is very close to the edge, I might be able to push him off the board. So I'm hoping to get him to fall back in good order at very minimum, if not to flee. So that's the situation I'm trying to set up. Other than that, it's just we're all sat in a little bit of a grind. It's definitely a grindy list to play against. So once you're in combat, you're probably in combat for a little while. Over to my turn 3, and combat continues. My noble charges into the side of the Wyvern, as I mentioned I was going to. The caster over in the top right marches just out of the flank of the Sorcerer Prophet. The idea being that I'm in range to cast a spell. I can potentially cast spells into combat. I want to try and Vault Unmaking next turn. I tried to do it this turn, but it didn't go off. I also want to be out of range of the Iron Demons, out of line of sight of them if possible. Obviously, they can't shoot over other large targets, so I'm hoping that the Sorcerer Prophet here is going to give me some cover. And I'm in a fairly safe spot. The only way this could go wrong is if the Wyvern decides to somehow win combat, which it should be impossible, and then Tom doesn't follow up and then can charge me. So I'm feeling fairly safe about this positioning. The Lothan Skycutters go into the middle, and this is just sort of a grind that takes a couple of rounds of combat, but basically ends up in everything very slowly dies. So I don't think we need to talk about that. I will say that I did actually make a mistake with how I played this fight. So on the left-hand side, the Lothan Skycutter and the Silver Helms make it into the Chaos Dwarves. That's good. On the other side, both Lothan Skycutters charge into the unit of Hobgoblins, do a decent amount of damage. They fall back in good order. I follow up. And obviously one of the Skycutters follows up into the flank of the unit here, the Chaos Dwarves. I've sequenced it wrong. For some reason, I don't know why, I attacked with these 2 units before I attacked with the unit that was going to overrun through them. Maybe there was a reason for it. Maybe I thought that I could kill them and get rid of the banner. I don't remember. But in retrospect, it probably would have been better just to have the Skycutters come in, get double impact hits, get more damage into it, and hopefully crunch this unit on my turn. But It's a small mistake, it's not the end of the world, and given their positioning, there's not really any risk that anything bad's going to happen to them other than the Sorcerer of Profit, but the Sorcerer of Profit probably has his handful with more other things. Combat-wise, it doesn't go as I want to. I do 2 wounds, so to be fair, I get 2 wounds. I'm now over a third of the way to killing the monstrous Wyvern with its -1 or -2 to be hit, depending on whether Storm of Ash is up. But yeah, it falls back. It gives ground. It doesn't even fall back in good order. Despite the massive combat res I have, it doesn't make a difference. We just end up, I win combat by a little bit. I decide that I have to follow up. I was thinking about testing to restrain with a dragon, facing the Sorcerer of Profit. Unfortunately, if I do that, all that happens is the Sorcerer of Profit decides to charge something else, and then my dragon's facing the wrong way. I don't get to do anything. So I think it's better for me to just continue to take this fight. And if he does recharge me, he gets +3 combat res, but I've got +4 with the BSB and the flank of the Wyvern, so it's not the end of the world. On to Tom's turn, and Tom does make the charges you'd expect. The Sorcerer of Profit goes into the rear of the dragon to hopefully help with the combat res. Obviously, there is a challenge going on between the dragon and the Wyvern, so, not going to be adding actual damage in there, but the 2 Iron Demons do come around as well to try and do some damage. Unfortunately, because of the Sorcerer of Profit's position, they are providing, they are shooting through cover. The Illyrian Reavers end up being safe. I think Tom does manage to get a single wound through, but I pass it with Oaken Shield, so doesn't actually make much of a difference, which, good for me. Other combat-wise, the Chaos Dwarfs die, and it is basically, at this point, it feels very obvious how the game is going. It's just a case of we're grinding through all the combats, and do the characters make the difference? It's very hard for me to catch the characters here, but I do win combat by 1 or 2. Both characters here just give ground. I test to restrain with both of them. We were playing with a little bit of a time crunch, so I actually do make a mistake here. I turn my noble to face the Sorcerer of Profit as well. Realistically, I should have just left it here, charged it into the Wyvern, given it the opportunity to just, sit there and tank it with hand weapon and shield. It's probably not going to go anywhere, which means that on my turn number 5, I could come back and charge it with the dragon, but I didn't do that, so, que sera, sera. Coming into my turn number 4, this is pretty much where we end things. There's not too much to be done after that point, but I do charge the dragon into the Sorcerer of Profit after casting Vol's Unmaking on it, getting rid of that ward save, which means that it's going to fall over really quickly, which I'm obviously a big fan of. And the combat here on the left does go in my favor. So we called it a game at this point because the dragon goes in, dragon does dragon things, hitting on 3s with everything, wounding on 3s and 4s, does 3 or 4 wounds into the Sorcerer of Profit, which ends up losing combat. For the first time, Tom rolls an actual flee. I chase him, get him off the board, and that's that. Which is a little bit unfortunate for Tom, but given the amount of leadership tests I've made him take of the game, you're not surprised to see one of them go out of your control. It's just a little bit unfortunate the one that did go out of his control was his general. That takes us to the end of the video. That's how I came to the Grand Army that I've been testing. And weirdly, it's very rare that I play one practice game with a list and find that I don't have anything that I want to change about it. I'm sure there will be tweaks, but I'm going to play probably another 5 or 10 games with this, try and get as many reps as possible with it as I can before I make any other serious changes. And I think I've come across something that is fairly well-rounded, plays pretty well. Something that I wanted to talk about that I think I didn't is one of the benefits of the Silver Helms, because they have unit champions, which they have to take the Ring of Fury, sorry. If you combo charge in a dragon and a unit of Silver Helms, if your opponent tries to challenge out your dragon, you just accept with the unit champion. I know that sounds very obvious, but it's the sort of thing that took me a while to sort of work out on the tabletop, because it's one of those things that like, oh, of course you can do that, but then you just never end up doing it in practice. So having that flexibility, both of the Silver Helm units have a champion. The Illyrian Reavers technically do, but you're not using them for that. And then also the Noble. You've got multiple things that you can charge in alongside a dragon. Make sure that you can protect your dragon from being challenged out, and you can just get it to really go to town, because if you've got something as expensive as a dragon, especially in a 1-dragon list, you want that dragon to be take its pound of flesh every turn. And I think this is a list that really sets up to do that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Grey Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.